Hello, and welcome to the Little Things in Yharnam. I'm your host, Redgrave, and it has been about 9 months since my last video. It's been quite a while, and I've had lots of people ask me where I am and what I've been up to. I've been up to many things in my personal life, some good, some bad. But quite simply, I haven't really had the inspiration or the energy to make videos for a long time. And this is sort of the first time I've really sort of had the drive to make one. But I'll be kind of going over my personal situation and the future of this channel at the end of this video. And for now, we're just going to have a fun little chat about Bloodborne's lore. Specifically today, we're going to be talking about that handwritten scroll you find in the beginning of the game. Seek pale blood to transcend the hunt. We're going to be going over the possibilities of who wrote it and why. Now, before I even get started on anything, I need to point out the fact, because everybody's going to be jumping on their tippy toes to tell me, hey, in the Japanese version of the game, it says that the player wrote the note. That's not true. That is misinformation. Anybody who tells you that is misinformed. It's spread a lot because it was said by a few high-profile YouTube content creators. It's not true. And I will be going in a little bit later about the Japanese direct translation, but I just need to preface this by saying, yeah, it's not true. The thing is that a lot of people really kind of want to find the smoking gun that will solve the mystery for them. And in the West, a lot of them turn to the Japanese script, hoping that they'll find some secret mystery that can be answered because the Japanese script has it and the English doesn't. Ironically enough, the Japanese community does the exact same thing. They spend lots of time going into the English scripts and looking for secrets or answers that can resolve some of the Japanese things. And since the dialogue is written in English first, you even get arguments from Japanese people saying, well, what if they mistranslated it from English into Japanese? So you get the exact same kind of conversations that you get in the West, where people going, oh, Frog Nation, but no, it's not true. And I will be going into that a little bit later. For now, I'd like to just start off this video with a very big leap, a premise, if you will. And that premise is, let's say this note is written by someone in the game, someone that we meet. That's a big if. Like, let's say that we can identify the author and then it wasn't just a complete stranger who left it. Which is, admittedly, a very big if and a very big assumption to make, but for the purposes of this video, let's say that someone in Bloodborne wrote that note. Well, it is found in Yosefka's clinic, and by my sort of the broadest scope I can have, we have 4 possible authors of this note. The first would be us, the player, the hunter. The second would be the blood minister in the beginning of the game, who gives us our transfusion. The third would be Yosefka, the real one. And the fourth would be Yosefka, the fake one. These are the only 4 people who really could have written that note. The only 4 people who had the ability to. So let's go over first by narrowing this down a little bit and seeing who could have done that. And the second question is, did they write that note for themselves, or did they write that note for another person? And this is where the Japanese translation, the direct translation, often gets misunderstood. The direct translation of the term handwritten scroll would be something along the lines of note that one would write to oneself. Nowhere in there is it a necessary condition that the one in question is the one reading it. Ooh, I just tapped my mic. That probably blew your fucking eardrums out. I apologize. So nowhere in that statement is it a condition that the one who's reading the note is the one who wrote the note. And that is the big sort of gap that a lot of people jump into. It does, however, seem to imply that it's a note to oneself. What that would mean is, imagine you are... Here's a good example I like to use when people ask me about the Japanese translation. Imagine you are walking down the street, or imagine you wake up in your room, you look at your night table, and you see a note that says, "Note to self, buy milk after work." Now, that doesn't necessarily mean you wrote that note. It means that somebody left a note to remind them to buy milk after work. It could have been you, it could have been your wife, your husband, your significant other, your boyfriend, your girlfriend, your mother, your father, your brother, your sister. It could have been anyone. But it doesn't have to be you. So the Japanese version of the game does seem to indicate that it is a note to oneself. It's a note that somebody wrote to themselves. Well, let's go over our 4 possible authors and see why they might have written this note. Let's start at the bottom with the fake Yosefka, because I think she's the one who is least likely to be our mysterious author. And that is because the fake Yosefka, by all accounts and by all the evidence we can find in the game, appears to have moved into Yosefka's clinic sometime around basically when we're fighting Gascoigne. She's moving in. If you've seen JSF's video on Yharnam at all, you know he makes this sort of leap that the little study in underneath Uden Chapel belonged to the fake Yosefka. He and I both agreed, this was a while ago, that if it had to belong to anyone in the game, she was the most likely owner. And the implication seems to be that while we're fighting Gascoigne, she sort of grabs her stuff and moves into the clinic, kills the real Yosefka, and takes her place. So in that timeline, it doesn't really seem possible that the fake Yosefka could have left that note unless she has been in the clinic before, which she certainly might have. She knew how to get there. But that seems like the least likely author because, as far as we know, when that note is there, there are 3 individuals in the clinic. Okay, so the next author would be the Blood Minister. This is, so let's assume, and again, we're making a lot of assumptions, that's sort of the fun of it, but let's assume that we're going to disregard the possibility, and it is a valid possibility, that the false Yosefka wrote the note. That leaves us with 3 authors. The third is the Blood Minister. Blood Doctor, I actually forget in the credits if he's credited as Blood Minister or Blood Doctor. I believe it's Blood Minister. The Blood Minister could have written that note for himself. And in fact, if depending on how long you've been following my work, way back into the beginning, I had many theories which would sound ridiculous now, but at the time, you know, back before we knew anything about Bloodborne's story, one of my very first theories revolved around that Blood Minister secretly being Lawrence, and that he was searching for people who could free Gehrman. And, you know, throughout time, that theory has been 99% debunked. As with anything in Bloodborne, there's always that tiny possibility. That's kind of the fun of it. But the problem with the Blood Minister having written that note is that nobody in Yharnam really seems to have heard of Pale Blood, with the exception of this secret society, the School of Mensis. They're the only ones who ever reference it. Behold, a pale blood sky. The nameless moon presence beckoned by Lawrence and his associates. Pale blood. It's the only real reference you get to it, other than that one reference in the beginning of the game where the Blood Minister goes, "Oh yes, pale blood." But as many people have noted, it almost sounds like we came to the Blood Minister asking for pale blood, and he goes, "Oh, well, Yharnam is the home of blood administration. Pale blood? Oh, yeah, I'm sure there's some of that around here." But it doesn't seem like anybody in the Healing Church really knows what pale blood is, or, you know, what it could refer to. It's only really the School of Mensis, this very insular secret society that sort of lurks underneath Yharnam, that talks about pale blood. And speaking of which, if we're going to be talking about who might write seek pale blood to transcend the hunt, we have to acknowledge that pale blood is a completely abstract concept. It's not a real thing. It doesn't really... There is no blood that can be called pale blood, which is another reason why the Blood Minister becomes less likely to be our author. And that's because the Blood Minister talks about pale blood in that opening sequence as if it's blood, which, as we've learned and as we've sort of confirmed and studied over the past 2 years, pale blood is not blood. Pale blood refers to a lot of different things. In Miyazaki's interview, he spoke about a couple of different ones, but one of the biggest, most prominent things that pale blood refers to is the pale blood moon presence, the monster, the demon that descends from the moon. Pale blood, the nameless moon presence that is beckoned by Lawrence and his associates. Pale blood, the moon presence. That is one of the big names. That is one of the big idealized concepts that comes from this abstract phrase, pale blood. Many people have talked about other ones. He also the pale blood sky, the sky that looks like a body that's been drained from blood. My own personal notion of pale blood as being the pale blood hunter, a term which I'm actually fairly happy with, and I'm kind of happy that it sort of gained a little bit of traction. But pale blood, yes, and when you write "seek pale blood to transcend the hunt," why would you write something like that? And we are left with two possible real authors, the hunter and Yosefka. Now, it's a very common theory that the note was written by the hunter and that the Canehurst invitation was also carried by the hunter, but that we forgot it on the way here, or we forgot it when we originally woke up. And that's a theory that's been talked about a lot, and in fact, I've talked about it in previous videos, and it's a theory that holds a lot of water. But for the purpose of this video, I'm interested in the other possibility, which is what if it's a note that Yosefka, the real Yosefka, left for herself, and she was researching pale blood? What are the implications of that? Because, as we will recall, the room that we can talk to Yosefka is the room in which that note exists. We wake up in it, we leave, and then the door shuts behind us the next time we reinitiate the area. And Yosefka is there blocking the way. So it is a room that she owns. It's a room that she presumably did research in. And if you're familiar at all with my thoughts on the real Yosefka, I don't think she's as nice as she appears. It appears to me that the procedure to create the celestial emissaries has been going on for far too long, and there's far too many research implements in there, and there's far too many corpses dumped in the back for it to all have been the fake Yosefka, without the real Yosefka knowing. That seems kind of silly to me. So it's possible that the real Yosefka was studying pale blood, and that means she might have been studying the moon presence. And in fact, the celestial emissaries, emissary being something designed to contact the Great Ones. So it's possible even that the Healing Church was trying to get in touch with the moon presence, the pale blood. In fact, that would explain the note, the nameless moon presence beckoned by Lawrence and his associates, pale blood. So that would actually kind of give an explanation as to what they're trying to do with the celestial emissaries as they're trying to get in touch with the moon presence. But this word pale blood, like I said, is very much a word only used by this secret society of Mensis. So it is kind of odd that Yosefka would know about it, because as far as we know, only the School of Mensis knows about it. So are there any connections between the real Yosefka and the School of Mensis? Well, there's one. There's that tricky little one that leaves so many people with their heads going, what? And it's that Yosefka's blood vial at the top of the Nightmare of Mensis. It's pretty unexplained and it's pretty weird. And it took me a while before I sort of got a couple of ideas in my head about how it could be there. But that is a definitive link between Yosefka and the School of Mensis, and it could possibly explain why she knows about Pale Blood. So let's say those are the two possibilities for someone writing a note to oneself. The hunter wrote a note to him or herself to say seek pale blood to transcend the hunt, and for whatever reason that is lost because we have amnesia. The other possibility being that Yosefka wrote the note to herself because she was studying the moon presence, studying pale blood, trying to do evil, naughty healing church research. But there is also the perfectly valid possibility, even though it's not in the Japanese script, it's only in the Western script, that the note was written for someone else. It's perfectly valid. And we can get sort of two possibilities for that. One would be that Yosefka wrote it for us, which is kind of a iffy possibility because Yosefka doesn't seem to recognize us when we walk in, when we first meet her. She doesn't seem to know that we were even in her clinic, which is kind of interesting, but that might be a topic for another day. The fourth one, which is a perfectly valid one, is that Yosefka left that as a note for the Blood Minister, instructing him to seek pale blood to transcend the hunt, which might explain why he's talking to us about pale blood in the very beginning of the game. Yosefka has a connection to the School of Mensis. The School of Mensis knows about pale blood. Yosefka instructs her blood minister to search for pale blood, and the blood minister has a conversation with us about pale blood. It's sort of a neat little chain of events. And so I think those are probably the three possibilities. Actually, you know what? I just thought of a brand new one that I hadn't even considered up until now, which is that the blood minister left it for us, and that would be even another step on the chain, which is that Yosefka is connected to the School of Mensis. School of Mensis is searching for pale blood. Yosefka is searching for pale blood. She instructs her blood minister to search for pale blood. Our blood minister has a conversation with us about pale blood, and then the blood minister leaves a note for us: seek pale blood to transcend the hunt. The problem with that is that we really know absolutely nothing about this blood minister, other than that he probably ended up being a half-transformed corpse in the back of the clinic. And that's about it. But yeah, I'd say those are the four possibilities. One, that we wrote the note for ourselves. Two, that Yosefka wrote the note for herself. Three, that Yosefka wrote the note for the minister. And four, that the minister wrote the note for us. I think those are four perfectly valid possibilities. And I think those are probably the four most likely possibilities if, and this is a very big if, we accept the assumption that the note has to be written by someone we meet in the game. Because it doesn't have to be. It could be written by God knows who. It could be written by a random nobody who was just a random School of Mensis person who was in Yosefka's clinic and dropped the note. It fell out of his pocket and then he walked off. Like there's any number of insane possibilities. But if we're looking for a sort of systematic approach to determining who left the note and why, I think those are our nice, neat four possibilities. So, which one do you like? I personally really kind of deviate between all four of them, honestly. Or, not the Blood Minister one as much, but the first three. I sometimes, depending on my mood, I'll shift around between one or the other. I'm intrigued by the possibilities of all of them. They all have interesting implications. But that's pretty much all I have to say on the handwritten scroll, that note in the beginning of the game. And I do want to remind people that it's kind of silly. This is kind of a personal rant, but it's kind of silly to imagine that something that big would be lost in translation. And it's kind of silly because that's not how Soul's storytelling works. Imagine for a moment that the script does say that we are the ones who wrote the note. How would it do that? Would the description of the note be, note that I wrote? There's never been a second note that you left for yourself. There's never been second person narration in a Souls game. It's a third person narration. It's third person narration. That's just how it's always been. It would be did a big in the Japanese version of the game, does a big thought bubble pop up above the hunter, and he goes, "Yes, this is the note that I left for myself." No, it's preposterous. It's silly. That's not how Miyazaki and From Software tell stories, or at least not in the Souls games. And you could talk about Otogi or something, but that's just not what they do. So, do you agree with what I'm saying? Do you think I'm full of shit? Either way, I'm happy if you watched this and if you enjoyed it. As for making more of these videos and for the future of the channel, I really don't know. It's very difficult for me to make these videos. Just in general, because I suffer from very severe clinical depression, and it is often very difficult for me to get the motivation to come out and make them. But thank you for everyone who has been asking me for more and supportive. But I want to make one thing very clear, that I am no longer really a Souls content creator. I've sort of hung that coat on the rack. This channel that I have, I might use for whatever, and I don't want people to necessarily believe that I am a Souls person and I will make Souls content, even though obviously my, I think, 4,000 subscribers are all here because of my Souls content. God only knows what content I might post on this channel. But I don't want people to expect anything more from me, because it might never come. And if that's the case, then, c'est la vie. Well, thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. If I got anything wrong, anything factually wrong, not anything opinion wrong, please leave a comment below so that I can go, because, I love being wrong. It's like one of my favorite things. And, yeah, tell me what you thought, and thank you very much for watching. I really appreciate it.